We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. So, what books did you all read on the beach this summer? Well, here's Chelsea manager Antonio Conte engrossed in a book called Football English. Nice trunks, Antonio. But here's a picture you might not have seen. Our very own Nick Ferrari.
Yeah.
And what's the book you've got there, Nick?
I can't see from here. What is it? I don't know.
It says, Debating for Beginners.
Oh, that'll be right.
Don't worry, we'll be gentle.
I didn't know you were the other side of the sand dune, Carole. Well done.
So, on the first show of Season 5, Nick will admit he hasn't got all the answers. Greg can see light at the end of the Brexit tunnel. Afua's just about managed to get over being interviewed by Piers Morgan, and Rachel appears to be coming round to my way of thinking. But before all that, it's me. This week, John Lewis became the first major retailer to ditch boys' and girls' clothing. In an act of self-harming, politically correct madness, it has made its own brand of clothes for children up to 14, gender neutral. Sorry, but when did it become wrong to go shopping for gender-specific clothing, i.e. boys' and girls' clothes? When can we no longer say the words boy or girl without having to qualify it? And why has John Lewis offended, and it has, so many of its loyal customers, to pander to the views of a tiny minority? Because in doing so, they've made many of their customers feel that shopping for boys' and girls' clothes is old-fashioned, unacceptable and wrong. They, like lots of other companies, are terrified of offending the small but vociferous army of PC terrorists, which has decreed that parents who embrace their diverse children are modern and accepting, while those who dare to question gender neutrality are bigoted and stupid. I don't want to live on a gender-neutral planet. I don't want to live in a world where calling boys boys and girls girls is seen as offensive. More importantly, it's not John Lewis's job to be pushing out messages on gender politics. And I'm angry that this much-loved and trusted retailer has neutralised kids' clothing for fear of offending the PC despots. Millions of mums will never forgive them. Here we go.
Carole, I thought we were back in term time, but it feels like it's still silly season, because this is really silly.
Why is it really silly?
This is really silly. Can I just show you a couple of images? So these are the clothes that we're talking about here, right? Look at this little cutie. So this is some gender-neutral clothing, and look at, this is a dress with dinosaurs on it. What do you find so offensive about a little girl?
I don't find offensive.
And this is the label saying for boys and girls.
I don't find the clothes offensive at all. I find the message offensive.
So what is the message?
I'm sick of hearing how kids' lives can be damaged and ruined by the clothes they wear, by the colours of the clothes they wear, by the toys they play with. And I think this is part of... You know, a writer yesterday called this bowing to the beige army, and I know exactly what he meant. He was saying that now, throughout society, we're neutralising anything that might be potentially offensive, and we're getting rid of it before the PC army comes down on it. And to me, what John Lewis have done here is silly. This is not their core customer that this is about. This is about pandering to a very small group of people. And there was an online what do you call it?
Poll?
Yeah, that's it. Yes, poll.
It's my only contribution, by the way.
Online poll, which asked people if they agreed with this. It had asked people if they agreed with retailers going gender neutral, and only 3,600 people bothered to say that
I'll let everyone else come in.
It was the good thing.
To your lengthy response, but I think it's ironic because you said nobody wants clothes to dictate gender. The only person suggesting clothes have that power is you.
No.
You're suggesting that allowing girls to wear dresses with dinosaurs on it is somehow erasing their right to be girls.
I'm not saying
the people you're referring to, the customers who are so outraged. I mean, you said why has John Lewis offended so many of his customers? I think it's because so many people don't understand this. They think that John Lewis is saying there is no such thing as gender. They're not. They're just saying if you're a girl, you don't have to wear pink all the time.
a statement
And
about
if
a
you're
very
a boy,
important issue at the moment.
You don't, you know, and this isn't, by the way, there is a serious side to this. I said it was silly
There
because
is.
I think it is, but there is a serious side, which is that we live in a world where Gap will bring out clothes for boys that say Little Scholar and for girls that say Social Butterfly, or where Clarks will have shoes for boys that say Leader and for girls that say Dolly Babe.
You think that wrecks
How
their
can
lives?
you be
Do
content
you really think?
to sit here as a woman who is in charge of your life and
seriously
say
think
to
that
little
affects the
girls,
way kids
just let
are
me
brought up?
finish, that say to little girls, it's OK for you to be programmed with the idea
Who's
that as a
saying that to
girl, you're a
little girls?
social butterfly and
It's
as a
only
boy,
you.
you're a
Carole,
leader.
I grew up in the 70s, and what's happened, I think, is we're losing sight of something, the context of this, which is cheap fashion. In the old days, when I grew up, my mum took me to Debenhams once a year, and she bought me a skirt and a pair of... Actually, I wore Boris's old cords, and I mean, I couldn't... But what we've seen is... Don't even ask, they were bell-bottoms. But it's about what's happened to the fashion industry as well. We've got supermarket clothes. We've got cheap and disposable fashion. And therefore, this seeped down into the children's ranges. And when my children were small, I mean, you are right. You know, the girls' clothes were pink and frilly, and the boys' clothes said sort of, you know, Basher, and the girls' clothes said Little Pink Princess. And that is wrong, because it does... And so it orientate girls into being these frilly princesses, Disney-fied, pinkification, boys into their sturdy, you know, manly leader. They're right to do it. They actually did it last year. They're not saying we don't have girls' clothes, we don't have boys' clothes. They're just saying, let's make it a bit more unisex so girls don't have to feel they have to be all pink and pretty. I'm all in favour.
Carole, every week you get angry about something. I
Well, it's a debate show.
Yeah,
I'm not-
yeah, I know, but you can't be angry about this. I mean, this will either work or it won't work.
Well, I'm
They'll
angry
either
with John Lewis, yeah.
Yes, it's a straightforward market thing. They'll either sell some or they won't. If they won't, they'll disappear. If they sell some, then it's a market. It's as simple as that.
I think it's good politics as well. It's good retail, I hope.
If you look online, it's not good politics because their core customers have reacted very badly to this. And I don't think that their core customers for 1 second see girls and boys' labels as repressive.
This is in tune with the
oppressive.
Times, Carole. I'm sorry you don't
not
like
the
it, but
Times,
it's correct.
It's
But it's
about
suggesting
choice,
that we have millions of transgender kids out there, and we don't.
No, but actually,
This is
at
the
this point,
misunderstanding. This is important.
Carole. I mean, sorry, Afua. If it's one thing,
Well, that's a
you
heck of a mistake.
I think
Boris?
I do agree with Carole on one thing, which is you shouldn't change a sort of overall universal policy in order to pander.
Yes.
And according to the Mirror and other
Yes.
papers today, a school in the south of England
Yep.
has banned girls from wearing skirts
Which is
because
totally wrong.
they say they do not want, according to the reports, do not want to offend the very tiny minority of transgender pupils. I think that is daft.
I think
we could
But
be
isn't it the
debating
same
that.
slippery slope?
I disagree. It's not like
Because
saying, listen, they should be... I'm all in favour of freedom of choice. I think
Yeah.
if the girls want to wear skirts,
Perfect.
the boys want to wear skirts,
But the girls
good.
should be allowed
But they
to
shouldn't-
choose.
Yes, they should. I don't think you should ban
This
anything.
is about choice.
No, well, is it? Is it? You see, Carole, broadly I agree with you. When you say I don't want to live on a planet where there's sand,
I don't want to live on a gender.
Yeah, I mean, that is
We're
wrong.
all gender fluid.
If that's the
We're not.
reason you want to give up on life...
Are you gender fluid?
No, I'm not.
No.
But where I do agree with you is... You know, there are a generation of grandparents and parents who go to John Lewis, is a very good example,
Yes.
and they want to be able to go and buy their granddaughter their school blouses. And I don't know why it's a crime that you go to a member of the sales staff, excuse me, where can I get my son some school shirts? Over there by the men's toilet. Oh, God, not the men's toilet. Over there by the same sex, near the non-gender baby changing rooms.
right.
And that is what we're
I
moving
think they'll
to.
survive, though, don't you, Nick? I mean, there are
John Lewis will survive, of
bigger
course he
threats to planetary
Yes,
safety,
no, I
as
just-
we'll be discussing
Yeah.
when
This is
your
such a
topic
big
comes up.
I do think this rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of what's going on here, Carole. I think you are giving John Lewis this superhuman power of turning kids transgender through their clothes marketing.
But you're putting words into my mouth.
But you said people don't want their kids to be transgender.
What I did was I looked at the website and I looked at what John Lewis customers were saying, and the way incandescent was great.
But why is
That's
it a
what I'm
crime?
saying.
Why is it a crime to go shopping for boys' clothes?
It's not. That's why they still have dresses, which I
But
expect
why
many
can't I have an
people
area
will buy
that says
for girls.
boys? Why can't I have an area that says boys?
Because what they're doing is trying to counter something which I find
Yes.
remarkable still exists, which is that you go into clothes shops and there's all this
But that's-
very hypermassive masculine.
That's not-
Boys, dinosaurs,
but Carole-
boys,
Carole's
soldiers.
never defended
and then
that.
there's princesses.
Carol's not defended that at all.
You come up with an idea to counter that then. At least John
I'm
Lewis is
saying what they're
trying.
doing is they're reacting against the PC brigade, which they think is going to come down on them like a ton of bricks.
Carole, you're the person who brought in the word transgender, and it's
Yes.
nothing to do with transgender.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
It's to do with saying, look, at a very young age, in all our lives, boys and girls were separated, basically. I mean, you go to have... And what they're saying is, well, is that necessarily the best way of bringing up children? No, but it's not about transgender.
But it is about
No,
Yes, it
you're
is
reading
about-
you're reading the rather extreme people on
And by the way, I think
Twitter
it's
and the
important to
rest
say
of
there's
it.
nothing wrong with being transgender as far as
course
I'm
there's not.
concerned, but this is not what it's about.
No.
It's about saying, as a girl,
Okay.
you don't have to define yourself through
Why don't they-
Victorian
why don't they
ideas
just-
about frills
just
and
drop
princesses.
the dross. Just drop all the dross with little girls with princess and boys with winner or stunner or whatever. Just drop all that
That's what
rubbish
they're
clothing.
doing.
No.
That's
Just
exactly
drop
that's not what they're
all
doing.
that rubbish clothing. Just put nice, decent lines out with girls can wear engineer bloody pyjamas if they want, and boys can wear
agree.
princess,
This
and
is
then shove
great.
it in there.
This is great.
But call it girls and bloody
it is
boys, because that's what we are.
Gender-neutral clothing.
John
You heard it here
Lewis, it's
first.
not their job to influence or to engineer public opinion. That's not their
but
job.
the
It's to sell nice clothes.
That will be, as a good marketeer, that will be sorted out by the market. They'll either sell it or they won't. If they won't, it'll disappear.
Do you know what, Carole? You're never knowingly undertold.
On that note,
that's what
on
they
that
should be
note-
doing.
On that note, moving on. Like, clothes are the least of my problems at the moment. What do ISIS, Norway, and jungles have in common? They are all places I should allegedly F off back to, having dared to question the status of our great national hero, Admiral Nelson. It all started when I noticed my fellow Brits criticising America's Confederate statues, comfortably suggesting that they should be pulled down. Having researched some of our own historical figures, I know for a fact that we too are still commemorating the men, and they almost always are men, who played a huge role in enslaving millions of Africans, starving millions of Indians, or looting and pillaging vast swathes of the empire for their own personal enrichment. I think it's about time we addressed the truth about these characters, instead of glorifying them on the huge phallic plinths that populate our cities. And yes, we should even consider pulling them down. It's time we stopped erasing uncomfortable parts of our history. And while we're at it, we should stop bullying people honest enough to point that out.
Norway. I mean,
I've always wanted to go to Norway.
but-
Wild,
yeah, no,
wild.
some of the other hideous insults. What is Norwegian about? What the flippin' floppin' is Norwegian about you?
I was born in Norway.
Oh, were you?
I was
you?
born in Norway.
Oh, for the love of all that's
Yeah,
holy, you learn something every day. Well, did anyone? Oh, well, I'm sure.
so there you go.
Help me with this. Are you saying we need to consider pulling Nelson's column down, or are you saying it needs to come down?
No, I'm saying I would like a debate. I'm not saying we should go and knock down Nelson's column tomorrow. All I'm saying is I would like us
What have I got to do to persuade you
consider
to
the
keep
truth.
it up?
I'd be quite happy to keep it up if, when we looked at Nelson, we could look at him in a context where we're all aware of the history. So most people who read my column said to me they knew nothing about Nelson's role in defending the slave trade. And similarly, many of our other heroes who were on the Mall or Whitehall, people didn't know anything about their role in the empire or the slave trade. So I want people to know. If people know, and they can look at these statues...
For the viewers who are not
I'm
familiar
happy.
with your column in The Guardian, we talk about Nelson having huge influence to perpetuate the tyranny, serial rape and exploitation organised by West Indian planters, some of whom he counted among his closest friends.
Would you disagree with any of that?
I haven't done enough research, you're probably right. But you have to look at when these statues were put up, as you do with Rhodes at Oxford University and various others. It was a different time. Where I will perhaps cede some ground to you is if you wanted a small plaque at the bottom of Nelson's column, or somewhere, I don't know, where people can read that there was another side to it and that they was engaged. But the idea that you effectively airbrush, erase, destroy, raise history to the ground. Someone has educated you. I find really surprising you do that.
That's the very opposite of what I'm doing.
No,
Actually, I'm
it is
saying
you say,
the version of
come on,
history that we have in our built environment is a very erased, very selective version of our past. And I would like a fuller... I want us to know
I will
more
finish
about
now, but
British
you
history.
want to bring Nelson's... You
Yes.
talked about bringing Nelson's column down. And for someone as educated you...
I said we should have a debate about it, Nick.
You don't
that's what
you don't
we're
move
doing.
forward by pulling down historical monuments.
No,
Enough.
but you do by debating it.
How can you apply your 21st century values to someone who lived and died 200 years ago. I want to ask you a question. Any historical figure you can think of now would have values that wouldn't be acceptable today. Would you accept that?
Yes.
Yeah. So why write the piece then? Why want to put the comment?
So let me explain. Can I answer your question?
Yes, of course.
So first of all, Nelson, so nobody's perfect. And I actually don't sign up to this idea where we kind of glorify historical figures as saints. You know, it's not about being perfect, being saintly, being on a pedestal. The issue is with Nelson, it's not some kind of amoral footnote in his track record. This is somebody who, even when his contemporaries were moving very close to the abolition of the slave trade, something we all celebrate as a great part of our history, Nelson was using the very same influence he had through his naval victories to try and continue the slave trade because he wanted it to continue.
Now, he wasn't alone.
That deserves to be remembered as part of his legacy, Carole.
Like half of the world, wrongly at the time, thought that black people were inferior. That's what he thought. It was of the times. Yes, it was totally wrong. But should we, in that case, then, should we go to the Vatican and smash all the statues?
No,
listen, let me say. Should we go to the Vatican and smash all the statues of Jesus Christ? Because we portray him as white.
No.
And he wasn't white. Should we do the same?
We still do portray him
We
as
still do
white.
portray him. Should we, we hail ancient Greece as the cradle of all democracy. Should we go down and knock down the Acropolis?
The difference
Every place you go to in history has this.
The difference is, when we look at the Egyptian pyramids or the Greek temples, I think most people know the context that they used slave labour to build them.
Yes.
The dark side of the empires they built.
Yes.
What we've done in Britain, Carole, is what you've just said about Nelson and the fact that very many significant British figures believe that black people were inferior. That's something we never talk about. It's something most people, when they look at all of these men on their plinths, don't know. It's not there. How many British people can name a single slave trader, a single plantation owner, or any of the men who built huge institutions off the back of slavery?
Colston.
Well, you can name Edward Colston, and probably mainly because there's been a big campaign to change the name of the whole. Most British people don't know the names of these people, but they do know the names of William Wilberforce, who helped abolish, not by himself, with the help of Africans whose names have been forgotten. So we've got a pattern where we've erased the people who are uncomfortable,
who don't fit our
narrative.
Trying to eradicate his heroism and saving us from France. That's what people believed when you wrote that piece.
This is a great place to put it on the table. That's not what I'm trying to do. I want a full version of British history, not erasing any of it.
Afua, I'm normally on your side in these debates, but I have to say, I think you were mistaken to raise this. I think there is an argument for change, for writing about our history and changing the way some of our history is written. But the idea, I mean, Nelson's column was built to a great admiral who won some great victories against the French, by and large. Why would you want to knock it down? I mean, most people who go to see it don't actually know who's up there anyway. I mean, it's known as Nelson's. I think they think it's that bloke off the Archers.
X-Factor winner.
But seriously, I think you are, by raising this whole thing, I think you're doing yourself a disservice, if you want my honest opinion. I don't think it matters.
Well, hold on.
I think it is worth change. It is worth having a discussion about how in history these people are represented.
It matters. It matters to me because I'm British, contrary to what a lot of people seem to think. Can I just make this one point, Rachel?
Yeah.
It matters to me because I grew up in this country, and when I walk around, I don't see anybody who looks like me or comes from the country my family came from in Ghana, who made huge contributions to building this country, not just the unnamed slaves who built this country off their backs, but also the leaders, the influencers, the thinkers, right? They're not remembered. There are no plaques for them. There are no statues for them. Instead, we commemorate the people who enslaved them, who robbed them, who oppressed them, and we do it without remembering that side of their history. We only remember their naval victories.
I sit on the committee that decides who gets a blue plaque in London, and there's an enormous effort being made to represent the people you're talking about.
And how long would you say that's been going on,
Greg? It's fairly recent, and it's dead right, and it should happen.
Exactly.
But that isn't an argument for demolishing everything that's there.
Sorry, Rachel.
Well, I congratulate you for having written a very provocative column in the silly season, and it runs and runs. But I think calling an admiral who actually cleared the way for abolition via defeating Napoleon in triumphant naval battles was unfair and probably ill-judged, and also the suggestion that we bring down one of London's greatest landmarks. I think there is a debate to be had about putting more interpretation on the statues and the commemorations of our white historical figures. But what you're essentially arguing for is a horrible beginning of what I call her historical correctness, where you have to go back and you have to accuse these people who have done good things and bad things in the past, essentially of thought crime, and then say they have to be erased from public life. Come on, Afua.
I strongly disagree,
you have a point about we don't recognise the people of colour who contributed, but that does not mean that we have to pursue a path of historical and political correctness and erase the past. It's not the same as bringing down Confederate statues, many of which were erected in the 1950s.
It's not the same as Confederate statues.
Part of the
and I haven't said it's the same.
Jim Crow movement.
But where I disagree with you is that this isn't about thought crime. This isn't about putting our standards...
You did. You said he disagreed with... He didn't disagree with slavery, therefore he was pro-slavery,
therefore his statue
Your column, it is figures like Nelson who spring to mind when I hear the latest news of Confederate statues being pulled down in the US. That's exactly Rachel's point.
No, but there are parallels in the sense of our relationship with our history, not saying that the statues... And just quickly, my last point, I have to make this point. This is about, you know, I'm not sitting at home with a bulldozer ready to go, Rachel. But my real problem is that we're so complacent in this country. It takes saying something as provocative as I did for anyone to even think about the problem with who we remember and who we forget. And that's what it takes.
I think it was 4-1 there, Afua, but it's time to move on. Just like EastEnders, the soap opera that is Brexit has been through a whole series of mini-dramas in the weeks we've been away. The Labour Party, largely thanks to the skills of Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer, actually reached a coherent policy on Brexit, which, if implemented, would mean staying in both the single market and the customs union for some years, and possibly even forever. The Liberal Party got a new leader in Vince Cable, a committed Remainer who believes a second referendum on the terms of exit is essential and will try to get cross-party support for this position. And meanwhile, the government is still wallowing around with a damaged leader and cabinet members fighting a series of Brexit battles amongst themselves. What now seems clear is that to get any sort of deal to leave will mean Britain giving the EU at least £50 billion. The Brexiteers didn't put that on the side of Boris's bus, did they? In turn, what this is likely to lead to is outrage from both UKIP and the nutty end of the Tory party and chaos in Parliament. No wonder Mrs May was desperate to get a bigger majority. For committed Remainers like me, the changes in both Labour and Liberal parties, combined with the shambles in government, is only good news. At last, we might see proper democracy in action, with MPs voting according to their beliefs, rather than doing what the whips tell them.
Good upsum, apart from your payoff, which is the problem we have, is that Parliament isn't doing what the whips tell them, it's doing what the country told them. And that is the essential. They are over a barrel. And the piteous sight we saw in the Commons this morning of MPs debating Brexit, when we know that 3/4 of them campaigned and voted for Remain. So you've never seen a more parliamentary sight of turkeys voting for Christmas. There's pain in the Commons at the moment. Nobody really thinks it's a good idea, but David Cameron held a referendum. The country voted 52% for out. There is nothing, apparently, that can stop that. I hope you're right about continuous transitional arrangements, but I've got an even better idea, which is what we should do is get the Passport Office to print 17.6 million of those hard-backed blue passports, which say Her Britannic Majesty on them, and this is a member of, you know, Her Royal... the Great Britain and UK and all the rest of it. Send each person who voted leave one of these hardback blue passports, tell them it's all happened, and then just forget all about it. Because as far as I'm concerned, that's the best way forward. We are heading for calamity.
Well, that's largely what happened with fox hunting, of course.
They just said it had stopped, and then it carried on.
The people who campaigned for it were happy, and the people who just carried on. But I was quite interested in Lord Adonis's comment when he says he believes that the Labour Party will eventually, sometime in the next 6 to 12 months, support another referendum, this time on the terms of the exit.
Well, breaking news. I'd actually talked to Jeremy Corbyn on Tuesday night, and I said as a Lib Dem, and I'm glad to see that the Labour Party is moving closer to a Lib Dem position of transitional arrangements can obtain, being in the customs union, being in the single market. Also, you're opposing the Great Repeal Bill on the grounds of ministers having too much executive power to change the law without things going to Parliament. And Jeremy Corbyn looked at me and he said, Rachel, there was a referendum and the Labour Party is committed to executing the result of that referendum. So if it does change and become a softer Brexit, it will not be because Jeremy Corbyn has changed his mind.
Well, that's the skill that has been seen this summer, that actually they're in a position that I suspect Jeremy Corbyn would have always opposed, because Jeremy Corbyn was always a Brexiteer.
You say that, Greg. You talk about Sir Keir Starmer. Just to remind everybody, he's, of course, Labour's Brexit secretary. You talked about his skills and how coherent it was. Let's just hear a little bit of what he said.
What we've said about the final arrangement is this, that we want a partnership with the EU that retains the benefits of the single market and the customs union. We are open to a discussion that leaves a customs union with the EU on the table as a viable option. We haven't swept it off the table.
This could be permanent.
We haven't swept that off the table. A customs union with the single with the EU.
So, not in the single market, but the benefit of the single market. Staying in the customs union and talking of sweeping reminds me a little of Trigger's broom, I think. If you recall, 17 new heads, 14 new handles, but still the same broom. That's presumably our EU policy, is it?
Well, I think we'll end up at... I mean, there's a whole series of stages going to come through this, but I think we'll end up with a deal that isn't acceptable to a lot of people for all sorts of reasons, and I think we'll have another vote on it.
You see another vote?
I think we'll have another vote on it, yes.
Yes, but it can't be called a second referendum. It's got to be called a first referendum on the terms.
Yes.
The term second referendum is toxic, and obviously it did for the Lib Dems in the last election.
I mean, you two, as token Brexiteers...
I'm holding back for now.
Yeah.
I've not interrupted you. Have you noticed? I'm waiting.
I'm curious as to how ordinary people who voted Brexit, what they make of this, because... it is really confusing. It's really confusing. Nobody seems to really know what they're doing. I thought Keir Starmer set out the most coherent Labour vision that I've heard so far, but I'm still confused, honestly. And David Davis, to me, seems to be in a complete fantasy parallel universe.
He's not in a fantasy paradise at all.
That aside,
he's working very hard.
Well, what do you think the ordinary
We've got a clip from
voter...
David Davis. Let's look at the clip from Davis now.
In July, the Commission set out the European Union position. We have a duty to our taxpayers to interrogate that position rigorously, and that's what we did line by line. It may have been a little bit of a shock to the Commission, but that's what we did line by line.
You know, you just said there, I don't know how you can say with a straight face that Brexiteers had a bad summer. I think the people that had a bad summer was the EU. You have Martin Selmayr, we know who he is, affectionately called the Monster. He's the Luxembourg Chief of Staff. He's saying... people in Britain were stupid to vote leave. We were stupid. And he said, but, we could probably reverse it if we wanted to. Then you've got Barnier saying he's going to educate us all, teach us a lesson on what Brexit really means. The French and the Poles have been scrapping all summer. Brussels is in total disarray. They're the people who've had a bad... I think they've shown their hand. I think they've shown themselves to be intransigent, bullying, rude. They've taken the mick out of our negotiating team constantly.
This is exactly why I say David Davis is in a fantasy
But he's
universe.
not in a fantasy land. He's doing what he just said.
EU, I don't think that's a great position for them to take. But the point is they can, because they hold all this bargaining power. The point is we need a deal with the EU.
Yes, of course we do.
So they can say what they like. They can be as patronising
But I thought we want to do a deal. But they're not allowing us to, because what they're saying is, pay us a big load of money up front, and then we'll talk to it, which is really insulting to everyone in the EU, all the families in the EU.
I've got a lot of time for David Davis, actually. I know him quite well, and I've got a lot of time for him. I think he'll probably get a deal in the end. But I think that deal will be unacceptable to a great chunk of the Tory party, to a lot of the Brexiteers. They're never going to agree. those people, I mean, you've only got to listen to the UKIP. They're never going to agree to us giving £50 billion to the EU.
But Afua, why would you want to stay with an organisation that when one of you seeks to leave, you get bullied, you get treated in a vile way, you get told you need to be...
Come on. You really think David Davis is being bullied?
We need to teach you a lesson. Why would you want to
destroy you?
I just think it's an extraordinary way to go about... What is that? Harmony and unity is their slogan, right? Harmony in unity. Well, where is the unity there? They can't wait to pour a bucket of cold water.
They're just telling the truth, which is that the deal has to be approved by 27...
Rachel, the people
don't point at me.
I'm not pointing, I learned that from your brother. The people decided that they want to leave. I'm sorry it's against your wishes. We have to respect it.
52%.
God, let's not go back there, Nick.
52% decided, not the people. 48 didn't want to leave. So, I mean, let's get this right.
37% of the country.
Yes, who voted to leave. But let's forget about that. In the end, there was going to be which is why did Theresa May go to the country? Because she needed a bigger majority to get through something that some of her party will never agree to. And that's the sort of deal they're going to come back with. And in the end, it'll fall apart because of that.
Her party didn't vote, though. It was the people who voted.
It's
not about her party.
To a unanimous decision because we move on. It's my debate next, and while he might be a figure of fun, I want to argue that Kim Jong-un is make or break for the United Nations. Not sure how you spent your summer holidays, but over in North Korea, Kim Jong-un swapped the traditional bucket and spade for missile tests and hydrogen bombs. Seemingly content to ignore all protests or attempts at mediation, and with the newish President Trump less than assured in the direction of his foreign policy, one minute there's talk of sending in the Marines, the next the Secretary of State calls for dialogue. These are deeply troubling times. Most commentators agree this is getting perilously close to an all-out war. Hence, all eyes on New York and the UN. But if the most exalted talking shop on the planet is to achieve anything, well, it has to buck its past form. From Srebrenica to Syria and Rwanda to Russian aggression being ignored, the UN has repeatedly done the wrong thing, nothing, or just looked away. The UN versus UN has to be the defining moment.
I mean, the problem with North Korea isn't... I can't think of anyone who's got a solution of how you deal with it. There's a very interesting quote from Steve Bannon, you know, who was the White House chief strategist until he got kicked out along with the rest of them, except for Trump. He said, there is no military solution, forget it, until somebody solves the part of the equation that shows me that 10 million people in Seoul don't die in the first 30 minutes from conventional weapons. I don't know what you're talking about. There's no military solution here. They got us. Now, if that's what his chief strategist, and then he's not exactly a liberal man, is he, Mr. Bannon?
But he's not wrong, is he?
No, he's dead right.
Yeah,
I suspect he's dead right. It makes you wonder why President Trump, therefore, was so outspoken and so, well, you know, we're going to get these guys and all the rest of it, when he can't. And he knows he can't. And I'm not sure... I mean, the UN will still exist. The UN will exist because it's a place where some solutions are solved, some problems are solved. But on issues like this, it is very difficult to see what anybody does. Now, the people who clearly... I mean, from reading all the stuff about it, when I knew you were going to talk about it, clearly the Chinese are crucial, are the key. And possibly... And it's clear that the Chinese think he's nuts as well.
Yes.
But what do? If the Americans go in, they have no option but to support him. The only possibilities, as I was reading from one columnist, is that they should go in. That the Chinese are probably the only people who could do anything about this.
But they don't have to go in militarily, do they? I mean, they've been bankrolling North Korea for years, you know, with food, with crude oil, with power. And North Korea now is in a mess. They're having blackouts all the time. They've got 25 million people. 80% of them are starving. So he could actually starve them out. The other possibility that I was reading about the other day is cyber warfare. And apparently 3 years ago, Obama launched a bit of cyber warfare and blew up rockets out there. So they exploded, and they thought it was his inability to make a rocket that made them explode. But apparently it was him. And it was assumed at the time that Britain was involved in that as well. And that would seem a good solution, would it not, to destroy the weapons via viruses and whatever?
I read that 88% of the missile tests from North Korea have failed because of cyber sabotage, because the usual failure rate is 5 to 10%, apparently. So there's been all kinds of covert stuff going on, hasn't there? But I think one of the things I think a lot of people don't realise is, just putting nukes to the side for a moment, if you look at the conventional weapons they've got just north of the demilitarised zone, they've got enough to basically... I think the phrase I heard used was rain ruin on one of the most densely populated urban areas in the world, just with their conventional weapons. Yeah, in Seoul at the moment. So it's. I feel so uncomfortable when I hear fast and loose talk, because that's the reality right now. Forget that by the end of Trump's term they could reach Los Angeles. They could take out millions of people tomorrow with their conventional weaponry. So it's on such a knife edge, and that's why I think we have to be really careful about the language. Like, there is no solution, like we all agree.
Well,
and we would love China. We would love China to play a leading role, because they're the one power that
Rachel, just before I bring you in, let's just hear you talk about... I mean, this is the sort of mixed messages that we're getting. This was Sunday. Secretary of State James, who delights in the nickname Mad Dog, James Mattis.
Kim Jong-un should take heed of the United Nations Security Council's unified voice. All members unanimously agreed on the threat North Korea poses, and they remain unanimous in their commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Because we are not looking to the total annihilation of a country, namely North Korea.
And now, 24 hours later, to the UN, the US Ambassador Nikki Haley.
Members of this council will no doubt urge negotiations and a return to talks. But as I've just outlined, we have engaged in numerous direct and multilateral talks with the North Korean regime, and time after time, they have not worked.
And to bring you in, Rachel, just to remind you that the debate is, and I haven't got a solution, by the way, anything better than the UN, but the UN really is going to be tested over this one, probably the ultimate test in recent years. Would you agree?
Totally. And what we're seeing is, as you said in your cue, is the UN is not being more than the sum of its parts. It's not acting as if it is, as it were, the global superpower policeman that can actually tell one country what to do. And the problem we have is that the individual actors are not using the first rule of diplomacy, which is talk softly and carry a big stick. They're talking loudly, carrying the big stick and waving the big stick now, as we saw from the last speaker.
Yeah, Nikki Haley.
What about, the best brains in the Foreign Office have this thought that China could cut off North Korea's oil supply. They've got 6 months of oil left. Could the UN put forward a resolution that says China must do this?
But then you've got a humanitarian crisis, and all of North Korea will move into China.
Well, that may be the thing.
China's never going to agree. At the moment, literally, it's like having the migrant crisis for them. Boom.
That may be the lesser of two evils. We have Putin saying that we can have... Putin, who is quite trigger-happy himself, saying, row back, everybody. Dialogue is the way forward.
And he says sanctions don't work.
And otherwise we're going to have a planetary disaster.
But he's been doing this for years, hasn't he? And what's happened is he's been like a dangerous kid with dangerous toys. And people... Jong-un.
Yeah.
And people have been giving him sweeteners, toys. And remember, Bush did the Food for Arms programme, and his people were starving then, they're starving now. So maybe that's a possibility, because military action does not seem to be an option. But, you're talking about the UN. If we're depending on them, we're in big trouble.
But the trouble with sanctions is it's not going to starve him. It's going to starve the population.
That is true.
Greg, what do you do if diplomacy fails?
I don't know.
It's frightening, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we all work on the assumption that there's always a solution. Could be there's no solution.
Isn't this a reminder as to why, and I know it is it's not very functional at the moment, but why we need a strong UN system? I mean, Trump systematically laid into the UN, undermined its authority. We've had Russia and China both undermining it. The fact is, look at Iraq. We know what happens when you try and take action against a state without international consensus. You end up with a failed state and potentially a longer problem. I mean, look at the long-term consequences of what we did in the Middle East without UN resolution. So you can't. It's kind of. You can't live with it. Can't live without it.
It took them 2 years to get into Darfur. It took them 3 years to get into Rwanda, the United Nations. And indeed, when you look at what they did in Srebrenica, they walked out at exactly the right moment, and loads of poor women were raped the minute they walked out. This is not a perfect organisation. I agree with you.
Nobody would say that
their track record does not give you any confidence.
And they're not very organised.
That makes the assumption that if they were organised, they could solve this. And I think there are some problems that you can't solve.
Fair point.
And I think this is very difficult. And I think... never did I think I'd be so much on the side of Steve Bannon.
Quoting for a second time.
But he got it right. They got us. They have. Once they got that, they got us.
I suppose the only hope is that he'll be toppled. There are a number of families in North Korea, vying for power to get him out. But the trouble is he has the full support of the military. He doesn't have all of the support of his people, but he does have the full support of the military.
Do we know that for sure?
Well, everything I've read about it says he has the support of the military. But the people, because the people are starving, they're angry.
But that's one of the things that has come out strongly for me lately, is just literally the lack of intelligence, the lack of strategy, the lack of information that we have about North Korea. So much of this is being done in the dark. I mean, that's, I guess, an inevitable byproduct of having a regime that is this extreme. And I wonder if people realise how extreme this cult of kind of racial superiority and divine inheritance is around this leader. It's not a nation that you can reason with.
Right. From one despotic leader to another, it's my turn next. And Nick, where's that broom? It's my debate, and I'm going to clear up. I'll be honest, do I think Theresa May is one of the weakest prime ministers we've ever had? Yes. Do I think she's tone deaf about her political prospects? Yes. Do I think she was cuckoo to call the election and lose the Tory majority? Yes. Do I think she should go and not stay? No. Please, no. We've been through enough. An election, a referendum, an election. The last thing me and Brenda from Bristol can stand is a leadership campaign, which is always what the Conservative Party does when it runs out of better ideas. If you Brexit, as the saying goes, you own it. Mrs May is partly responsible for the mess we're in. The Brexit clock is ticking away, and she hasn't even begun on the other promises she made at the start of her premiership to do with reform of welfare, housing and the social contract, or anything else. She has to stay as long as the party wants her to, and start to clear it all up.
Do you know, I'm a little bit confused here, because the week after the election, my piece was Theresa May should stay. And I said everything you just said. I said she's cocked it up, she's made a mess of it, she's not going to be the best Prime Minister, but the alternative is too horrible to imagine, and there's not anyone to take her place. 3 weeks after that, you did a piece where you said, let me just quote, you said, she's a puppet PM, a hostage to the DUP and the Tory skeptics.
And she has, and
she has to go. And you ended it by saying she has to go. And you even said to him when he asked you the question directly, should you go? And you said yes, she has to go.
Yeah. So a week is a long time in politics.
Well, it's
you're talking about something that happened months ago.
I just thought you might have
irrelevant
had
to current
to Damascus moment and come round to my way of thinking.
Can I just have Rachel's back here, because I remember that moment and I agreed. But no, listen.
Oh, but you didn't agree with me at the time.
They were bad times, right? It's like the damage has been done. Okay, there was a moment where you felt like we could maybe salvage the situation somehow, but it's done now. We're in this mess. Somebody's got to clean up. And I don't see why she shouldn't do it. She got us into it. The worst case scenario would be...
Jeremy Corbyn.
No, that would not be the worst case scenario. And actually, for me, you know what? Just leave her there. She's showing how uninspired the Conservative Party is at the moment, how divided they are. They've got a job to do. They committed themselves to it. Let them get on with it. And you know what? Just let her
So your reasons for having Rachel's back are totally different from why Rachel wants her to stay.
I feel the same about Theresa
Let her
May.
make a mess of it and mess the country up.
No, I don't want to mess the country up. You've already messed the country up. So now we've just got to go through the motions of getting us to a place that is functional.
Can I just say,
do you think she's going to last till the next election?
Well, should we just see? I think the viewers might want to have a look at Theresa May, and you can see that she obviously knows that she's not obviously the first choice given in an ideal world, but there she is, and the alternatives are unpalatable. Let's have a look at her.
I said I wasn't a quitter, and there's a long-term job to do. There's an important job to be done in the United Kingdom. We stand at a really critical time in the UK. Yes, that's partly about Brexit and getting Brexit right, but if you think back to what I said when I became Prime Minister, when I stood in Downing Street, there are many other issues that we need to address.
I don't want to go back to Brexit particularly, but what we saw this week is really the Tory rank and file, or the people like Damien Green saying, we've got to back Brexit and Theresa May, otherwise we're going to get this.
But that doesn't scare them. The problem with that they've got is that they tried that in the election.
It scares the
Tories.
Telegraph readers, but it doesn't scare the rest of the country.
It doesn't scare the rest of the country. I think... I hope she stays unless you could guarantee that Jacob Rees-Mogg gets it if she goes. Because if Jacob Rees-Mogg gets it, I think it puts the Tories into opposition forever.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. People like Jacob Rees-Mogg. They think he's an honest guy. They do. But
not as a leader.
But, you know, I think it's interesting what's happened to Theresa May since the election. She was vilified in the weeks after. I think people are changing towards her a bit now. I think they're softer. I think if there was an amazing candidate in the wings, she wouldn't be there. But the fact is, you know, look how politics have changed with Jeremy Corbyn. A year ago, people hated him. Now he's the strongest politician we have in the country. So people change. And I think people are on the verge of forgiving Theresa May.
I think you misunderstood my cue, which is I think that Theresa May has to stay because I think Brexit is going to be so damaging, she's going to go down with the Brexit ship.
I think you're wrong.
Brexit is going to take down anybody who is trying to execute Brexit as leader. And thereafter, there will be probably... I don't think we're going to see a Tory government in my lifetime.
I think you're wrong. I think she is dogged. I think that's one of the things about it. She's not inspiring. She's not Mrs. Personality, but I think she's dogged, and I think that's good for Brexit.
She will stay. She will stay. She will stay. I would have thought minimum of 2 years. But what the Conservatives, like your brother, have done is what people like that always do in times of trouble. They call for nanny. And effectively, Theresa May is like the nanny who's come along and will look after the party for the next 2 years. But I think the generation of the David Davises and others, I think their day has come and gone as a party leader. You will look to the next generation coming up. That will be probably in about 2 years' time. Next month's Conservative Party conference, which I know I'm going to, and I'm sure you're probably there, will be a very, very interesting affair. And if we were to have this conversation, say, the middle of October, when we've all had a chance to see whether she can rally the faithful, the message she gives, I still agree with Greg, she's going to be there. But the sort of time that she enjoys, the sort of policy, a sort of strength that she has behind her will be determined how she fares in Manchester.
The trouble is, it's very hard to move to the next generation while you're in government.
Yes.
You can do it in opposition, as you saw with lots of people. We saw with Blair, you saw with Cameron. It's very hard to do it in government. It's very hard to pick somebody who's not even in the cabinet and say, you're now the Prime Minister. So I can't see that happening, which is why I think she will survive and probably lead them into the next election.
Now, that's where I don't see... I can't see them... Because she's a loser. I mean, the Conservatives are nothing if not brutal. Yes. I mean, they exist for power and stabbing each other in the chest. That's the best fun of entertainment that they have.
But who?
Afua. No, I don't even say nobody.
I'm trying to think of a more pleasant way of putting this, but to me, there's no point polishing a turd. The situation.
Sorry, I mean, honestly,
it has to be said.
Potty mouth.
There's nothing good about the current situation. I think everyone on both sides.
What you said about Lord Nelson quite.
No, it's bad. It's bad. Oh, please. The faux outrage is killing me.
Nice. And that's
not very nice.
You guys
not
would
a
have
very nice situation.
for having a go at another woman saying something.
No, I'm not talking about her, Carole. I'm talking about the political reality.
You just called her a turd.
No, not her,
No, let's
Carole.
not use that word.
Not her. The political reality. And in a way, why let anyone else get tarnished by it? Somebody's got to ride this out. It's unpleasant. It's depressing. There's nothing inspiring. It's
Brexit
toxic.
Is toxic. You mark my words. You two will be agreeing with me in about 6 months' time.
Which is why no one else is rushing to become Prime Minister.
Nobody wants it. Why did Cameron scarper from the steps of Downing Street 5 minutes after the referendum? He knew I didn't want to. This was the end.
He's a coward. He should have stayed.
It will finish more political careers than I've had breakfasts.
Well, we can't let her get away with that. It's not going to happen. It isn't going to happen. Brexit will happen, and the people who will get us a bad deal.
We will officially leave the EU, but Brexit can't happen in the same way.
Well, it can. It can if we do exactly what people asked for was to leave the single market and leave the customs union.
No, they didn't. No. They said leave the EU, and we've got the Labour Party saying what that could also mean staying within.
What they really said was we don't want free movement of labour. That's what they really said.
There was one thing on the ballot paper: leave the EU.
Yes.
Well, exactly. We can tell everybody
but people
we've left.
Knew what it meant, Rich. You guys can't keep on saying people didn't know what they were voting for. Yes, they did. People aren't stupid, and they knew what they were voting for.
Carole, we could talk about this till the cows come home. I suspect we will be. But it's time for our first Straight Talker Award of the series. Our chance to recognise someone for sticking to their guns and speaking from the heart. There are lots of candidates, but even though every fibre of my being passionately disagrees with him, I'd like to award it to Flavour of the Month MP Jacob Rees-Mogg for his bravery on Good Morning Britain.
With same-sex marriage, that is something that people are doing for themselves. With abortion, it is something that is done to the unborn child.
Are you completely opposed to abortion in all circumstances?
Yes, I am.
Rape and incest?
Sexual violence?
I'm afraid so.
Really?
Life is sacrosanct and begins at the point of conception.
As I say, completely and utterly disagree, but at least he was honest.
I think you're totally right. And I think, you know, he knows he's been mooted for Prime Minister. If he really wanted to, if he was your typical politician, he would have answered that in a different way. But he didn't care about that. And I think that's why people like him. They think he's decent. They think he's honest. I'm with you. I totally don't agree with what he said. But I really, really love the fact that he had the guts to say
it's morally wrong, but still agree with there being a law for it.
I'm trying to find it. I get the point. I'm trying to find it in myself to say it's great to hear somebody speaking from principle. But I just can't. It's not just that I disagree with his views. I so radically and fundamentally disagree with his views and find them so dangerous that I can't celebrate.
Do you actually think he was being clever and it was actually appealing to a core
Jacob's
constituents?
gone crackers, clearly, with his views there. But with the phone-in show that I did on it today, everybody phoned it. I don't agree with the word he says, but I love the fact that he's not courting popularity.
You see, he's actually speaking to his core constituency of people who think he's honest and authentic.
But his core constituency won't be enough. To get him elected.
It's interesting that his core is it's not posh people. It's actually a lot of working class people support him, which is odd, and I don't know why they do, but they do. He's very attractive to those people because it's the first time they've heard a politician talk straight, and that's why
we don't have a problem with politicians talking straight. We've got Trump.
We
live in an era where people can just
he's not governing us. He's not governing us, Afua. We're talking about people here.
But it is quite the views are quite offensive.
Well, yes,
totally.
And that's why he won't get the majority support, because the views are quite offensive.
Agree it's offensive.
Yes, it's offensive.
OK,
100%.
that's it. That's it for this week. Goodbye.
Provocative. Straight talking. Fairness. Provocative. Straight talking.